That's a great segue into tonight's topic, which is what am I making this mean? This is kind of one of my. I think of this episode as a foundational one for this podcast, Jenny's Dying to Live, because it's one of the places that I work from pretty much every day and multiple times a day. So before I really get into it, what I want to do is read a few things, read a few statements to you. And I want you to take just a moment as I'm reading and think about how this is landing with you, what I'm saying. How is it landing to you? Are you resonating with it? And what feelings are coming up? Okay, you ready? Someone doesn't text you back, and suddenly it means that they don't care. A diagnosis doesn't just mean a medical condition. It can mean my life is over. A rejection becomes I'm not good enough. Or if you're in a quiet room, you can feel and tell yourself, I'm totally alone. So, my question is, what if the meaning isn't really inherent? What if the meaning is something that we're creating? And usually it is. We're creating meanings and we're applying it to an experience or an event. And then there's a chain reaction that follows after that, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. So, events are actually going to be neutral, but the meaning is applied to these neutral events. And it can either be a healthy meaning or interpretation, or it can be one that doesn't serve us very well. And so what we're going to talk about today is how to stop that spiral if you get into attaching, first of all, creating meanings that aren't serving you very well and attaching them to neutral events, because that's what really creates a lot of the suffering. So the first question is, why do we do this? And there's two parts to that answer. The first one is that we're simply human beings, and this is the way our brains work. So if you do this, and it's not really an if, it's I know that you do because you're a human being. All throughout the day, meanings are created and applied, and it's very automatic. You don't even think about it. Say your husband doesn't do something that you thought he was going to do, and you think silently in your head, he never remembers, or he's so thoughtless. We do things like this all the time, right? So it's very automatic, but we can change the meaning. Might not be able to change the event or the experience, but we can change the meaning that we create and then apply to it. So our brains, particularly the reptilian part of your brain, it's a very primal part of your brain that does not like open spaces, empty blanks, does not like circles that are not closed. It does not like uncertainty. So whenever it feels like, or it senses that one of those things are happening, it senses danger. Now obviously, you're not in danger. Well, you could be, but usually we're not in danger. Usually it's something like you just feel uncomfortable, or you feel a little upset, or you feel angry, or in a more strong situation, you could feel slightly traumatized or even really traumatized, but you're not likely in a situation where you're going to die. But your brain doesn't know that. So it's going to do what it needs to do to close the loop, to fill in the blank, to get rid of all the empty space. That's where it feels the most comfortable and the most safe. So that's one thing about the brain that happens. The second reason why we make up these types of interpretations or meanings could have also have something to do with things that have happened in your past. It could be something like a childhood experience or a trauma or even cultural conditioning, something like that. So when something happens currently and you apply a meaning to it, what can often be happening is that you're reacting to something that's already happened in the past, and you're triggered. The new event is triggering you or us into applying an old meaning to a new situation. So you see how that goes? It could be something that somebody else did in your life 20 years ago, and you're applying that same interpretation to your spouse or to a friend. Could be your parent died of a particular disease, as my mother died actually of breast cancer, and I could be taking that meaning from that experience and applying it to my own diagnosis, which is going to freak me out, right? So those are two ways that we do this, and we do them automatically. And so after after we create that meaning, what happens is kind of a chain event. And I want to kind of go through what happens so you can see, and it happens in an instant, you guys. It's not like we sit and think, okay, that was an event. What meaning am I going to create and apply to it? How am I going to feel? We don't do that. We just react. So here's a typical chain of events that happens after an event. So the event is, let's just make something up. Somebody cancels on you at the last minute. I'm an introvert, so I actually kind of like that. So I'm not going to have a problem with it. But you could apply a meaning that says, I'm not important to this person. And then what's your emotion that's going to happen after that is often going to be something like hurt or rejection. And that's going to then impact your behavior, which could be something like withdrawal or resentment. And that behavior then influences an outcome of disconnection to the person that originally canceled the plans with you. And that can happen in an instant, you guys. In an instant. We don't even think about it. So that's kind of what we're talking about tonight is creating a little bit of that space in between an event happening and the meaning that we apply to it so that we don't have this really unhealthy or unhelpful chain of reaction after that. Um, so one thing I wanted to go through is just like a couple of it's the big question is something that I use actually as a tool. It's a strategy that I use every day. And the question is, what am I making this mean? So when you ask yourself that question, I mean, if you're doing great, you're going to ask yourself that question right at the time that you feel uncomfortable. But that's not often what we do, right? We apply the meaning and then we kind of realize, oh, I'm feeling really crappy. And then you start thinking about it. So asking yourself the question, what am I making this mean, creates a little bit of space between the event and the meaning that you're creating. And it interrupts that automatic suffering that we create when we attach a meaning to something. So a few questions that you can ask yourself after something happens and you attach a meaning to it immediately, you can then go back and ask, is this meaning objectively true? That's one question you could ask. You could ask, is this interpretation helping me or is it hurting me? Is it making me feel worse? Is it making me feel better? That's another good question to ask. And another one that I really like is there another meaning available to me right now? And you can kind of list those things. Now, most of us are not going to do that right away. And again, I'm going to go back to reminding you that this is a normal, absolutely normal reaction that we all do. So don't feel bad when you don't catch it at the beginning, right when you create the meaning, because hardly anybody does. Sometimes we're in a softer space and we can do that, but not too often. So if you allow yourself, give yourself a little bit of space by asking that question, using the question as a tool, what am I making this mean? Now you're allowing yourself to open up the situation to more curiosity about what's going on. And then you can create possibly a different meaning that's going to help you out, a little bit better. So some real life examples is, and I'm going to tell you a personal story in just a minute, but uh, like instead of saying this diagnosis means my life is over, an alternative meaning could be this diagnosis is an invitation to live more intentionally, or this diagnosis clarifies what matters, or this diagnosis changes my relationship with time. You see where I'm going with that? So let's see. Another example would be they didn't choose me, so I'm not worthy. And that could be a person not choosing you. It could be a job, a potential job not choosing you, and you think I'm not worthy. But an alternative interpretation could be something like that just wasn't aligned with me, or that person was not aligned with me. And you could also then just see it as a redirection. Okay, that path didn't work. I didn't get a yes back, or at least not a yes right now. So I'm going to pivot and I'm going to go over here. So there's an opportunity for a redirection there. So here's where I want to tell you a story about what happened when I was diagnosed, literally the day I was diagnosed. some of you already know my backstory, but in a really quick, like 10-second nutshell, it was June of 2024. I was in the hospital because my back broke. It broke because it was made vulnerable by cancerous tumors that I did not know that I had, even though I was under a doctor's care. So after the surgery, they had to stabilize my back, and the surgeon came in, I want to say it was 2 days later, and he said, "Hey, we got the biopsy back. And it's just as we thought, those are cancerous tumors on your spine." And so what I asked him was, because this was not my first rodeo with the cancer diagnosis, what I asked him was immediately was, I said, "So you're telling me that this is stage 4 metastatic breast cancer to the spine, and you believe it's not curable?" Because in the medical world right now, stage 4 is deemed not curable. And he said, "Yes." So he said, Your oncologist is going to be joining you, later this evening as he's able to, and he'll go over more of the details with you." So my oncologist was actually out of town. So one of his colleagues stopped by, Dr. Camp. If I couldn't have my own, the oncologist that I have now, I would love to have Dr. Camp because he was amazing. So when Dr. Camp came in, he said, and this was about 3 hours later, and Luke, this was before I called you and your brother. So I didn't have this information, or I had this information when I called you guys. But when Dr. Camp came in, he said to me, "I hear you got some tough news today." And of course, I was tearful and I said, "Yeah." And I said, I went right into it. I said, "So how much time do you think I have? Like 2 to 3 years?" And he immediately said, "Oh, God, no." And I'm laughing now. It wasn't really funny. I may have laughed nervously at the time because he was just almost kind of jovial about it. He goes, "Oh, God, no." He said, "With the treatments that we have available to us today, you have about, 10 years, 10 plus years." And he said, "But keep in mind, every 4 to 5 to 6 years, we come up with new and improved treatments, ways to manage side effects, all those kinds of things, ways to diagnose. So you're good." But about a month later, my buddy Jim called, and the first thing he asked me was, "Jenny," and Jim is my friend, but he's also a mentor to me. He's a He's a shaman's apprentice, which is really interesting. But he also, we were psychology majors together in college. And so he uses psychology, brain science, and what he calls ancient wisdom that's kind of his worldview. And to me, that's really fascinating. And I resonate with that. So he called me to check in on me, and he asked me, "Jenny, think back to when you were very first diagnosed," where I'm talking not the week, I'm talking the moment you were diagnosed. "What did you make it mean?" And without batting an eye, I said, "I made it mean I was screwed. I'm screwed." And I had 3 hours to think that. 3 hours, you guys, where I thought, "I'm screwed. I'm going to be dead in 2 to 3 years, and I got to call my kids tonight, and I got to tell them that. How am I going to do that?" And my mind was just racing, racing, racing. So remember when Dr. Camp came in and told me, "Oh, God, no, it's 10 plus years." And of course, I had this flood of relief, that just washed over me. But then, when Jim was talking to me on the phone a month later, I thought, he said, "Do you see the suffering that you caused for yourself by thinking I'm screwed?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And he said, "What other interpretations or meanings can you give this diagnosis now?" And to me, that was fascinating. To me, that was life changing because it gave me an opportunity to not think of this diagnosis as my life is over. My life has no meaning. My life has no purpose. I can't make any plans, things like that. That's really rough. That's a hard space to be in. That's a really, really hard space to be in. And so I tell you that story by way of letting you know that we make these meanings, and it's not the event itself, it's not the experience itself that causes so much of the suffering. Sometimes it is, of course. Like, a stage 4 cancer diagnosis that's rough no matter how you cut it, no matter what meaning you put on it. But I made it infinitely worse by telling myself in my head, "I'm screwed. I'm dead in 3 years. I'm screwed." I didn't need to do that. And that's the whole point of this. So what I'd like to for you guys to do is just give you an invitation for this coming week, that to remember that the meaning that we apply to things is one of the most powerful things. It's one of the most powerful tools that we have in our toolbox. It can help to move us forward, or it can limit the way we think about our life or our future or our relationship or our next decision. And that's how powerful it is. So, my invitation to you is this next week, when you feel have an instance or an event where you feel uncomfortable or upset or anxious. Anxious is a good one, because anxious usually means that you are applying a meaning to something that is not based in any kind of reality. So really pay attention to those types of feelings: discomfort, anger, upset, anxiety. And then ask yourself, when you catch it, ask yourself, what am I making this mean? Because I think when you pause and you give yourself just enough space to rethink these things, then all sorts of things can kind of float up to the surface. And that gives you that opportunity to then apply a different meaning. And I'm not sure if I said this earlier. This is not about being in denial. This is not about toxic positivity. It has nothing to do with that. The event or the experience that you had is the event, is the experience. It is what it is. We accept what it is. We accept what happened. But it's the meaning that we can change. The meaning that we apply to it can change. And it's not about saying, oh, it's just fine. Whatever it was that happened, somebody didn't call me back. I got rejected. I got a bad diagnosis. Oh, it's totally fine. It's not about that either. That is also not helpful, but in the opposite direction. So we don't want to do any one of those things. What we want to do is look at the event or the experience and accept that that happened, and then consciously, deliberately kind of run through our minds and think, what meaning can I apply to this that's going to be helpful to me? Not toxic positivity, not in denial. That's not good. But what's going to be helpful to me? What's going to gently move me forward instead of holding me back? So I really hope that was helpful to you, because, like I said at the very beginning, I consider this episode a very foundational one for this podcast, because it's the place that I work from pretty much every day. When I'm upset, I have to check in with myself and ask myself, what am I making this mean? So what I'd like to do right now, Luke is going to, we're just going to open this up to any comments, questions, any kind of conversation that you guys have about this. And Luke is going to read those off, and we're going to just have a little conversation about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everyone for tuning in. So Chris McLaughlin says, "Oh my God, this conversation fits so specifically to what happened to me, which we talked about today. Thank you," in all caps. And then Chris also says, "Anxious. I feel so called out. LOL."
Chris, Chris is a dear friend, and I was talking with her today. And, like a lot of us, Chris is going through something right now. And it is true. It is true. When it's really those anxious thoughts that give you a sign or a signal that that you're attaching a meaning to something that likely is not true. That's where anxiety comes from. It's that danger part of your brain that says, things are going haywire. This is chaos. We don't like this. And then your whole body gets involved. It starts in your brain, and then your whole body gets involved with the butterflies and the sweaty palms and the heart racing, and your thoughts racing and all of that. So anxiety is a really, really good clue to slow it down and ask, what am I making this mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Cliff, actually, this is a question for me. Cliff asks, Luke, what meaning did you apply to the news the moment Jenny told you about her diagnosis?
A very
Um, I think for me, it was definitely a similar thing that I think my mom applied to herself, which was I just kind of thought, oh my gosh, she's totally screwed. And I, yeah, I had, it was a really hard moment. I was crying and all of that. And I think the biggest thing that caused anxiety for me in that moment was like what's the reliability of this prognosis when we've only just got this diagnosis? Like, what if they go in and they see, oh, actually, this is um, this is totally even somehow worse than we expected. And so I was just thinking, all that I was thinking that of inconsistencies in, the medical diagnosis of this. And I was thinking about how her physicality was just going to be so declining in for the rest of her life. And oh my gosh, does this mean she's going to be paralyzed forever and all that? Well, am I not going to be able? Is she not going to be able to enjoy her life? And then, and second of all, am I not going to be able to enjoy all the other things that I like to enjoy with my own mom? So as we know now, the prognosis still looks great after, gosh, 2 years now,
Oh,
or a year
fun.
and a half. Yeah.
Yeah, 2 years in
So
June.
yeah, absolutely. We're still trucking along, and Jenny's doing great. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Um,
Last scans that I had were totally clear. Um, and that doesn't mean, you guys, that doesn't mean that I stopped treatment, because when you're diagnosed initially at stage 4, that means you're in treatment for the rest of your life or until such time as you make a different decision for whatever reason seems valid to you. And so I still remain in treatment, and my body so far is tolerating it. I do have significant side effects, like I led with today, telling you about how I've been feeling this week. And I don't need to make it mean that my life is over and hide under the covers, because I've got a life to live. I've got kids. I've got friends. I have work to do. I've got my husband. I've got dreams that I still have yet to realize. So, you know, I have to. My work now is a balance. My work in my life, for my life, is creating that balance between taking really good care of myself, and so that my body can continue to heal and strengthen, but also um, pushing myself when it's appropriate, but not crazy, because my body doesn't like when I go, too overboard. So that's kind of where we're at right now. But Luke, I appreciate you sharing that, because that was probably the worst moment of my life, was having to call you guys. It was worse than me getting that information, because I think anybody who's a parent or has somebody that they really love, they would rather handle something themselves than see their loved one suffer like that. Do we have any other questions or comments?
Chris says your conversation today is such a great reminder, and that he got tons out of it.
Oh, thanks. I'm so glad about that, because um, when we do things like this that are automatic and we do them subconsciously, just by meaning of that, means that we're not aware of it. And so what we're trying to do is make ourselves aware of it. You can train your brain to do something different. The brain, you're not obligated to have those knee-jerk reactions that cause more suffering. So that's the whole point of this whole conversation. And there are so many different ways that we can do that, but that's one way. There's deep breathing exercises and all sorts of things like that. But my favorite way is asking this question. Anything else, Luke?
Kelly says, "Thank you. Good timing on this conversation." Hey, Kelly, how's it going? And then Chris also says, "Jenny, this podcast is going to be so incredibly important for people." And then Cliff also asks, "How did Brett react?"
Oh, well, so Brett wasn't there when I got the news. So I was at a hospital in Austin, and our house is out in Bastrop, which is about an hour away. And he was taking care of our dogs and doing chores before he came in. He was coming in, of course, every day, and he would spend um, like the second part of the afternoon and then the whole evening with me before going home. So I called him, and he was out like in the backyard with the dogs. And I called him, and of course I was crying, and told him um, that it came back positive, that I do have cancer in my spine again, or not again, but it has come back and it's in my spine. And he said, "Okay, I'm on my way." So when he got to my hospital room, I was in one of those big double, it was called trauma ICU. And I think, Luke, you weren't there. when I was in trauma ICU because that was a big, huge double room, and the monitors behind me looked like a whole wall of computers. It was pretty intense. And so Brett got there, and Luke will attest to this. Brett is not a crier. Brett is I think I've seen Brett cry in the 20 years I've known him maybe 3 times. And he cried and he said, "I didn't wait this long to find you just to lose you now." And that's what he made it mean, was that he was going to lose me. And that's a really, traumatizing space to be in, to live in. And so we had to work through that, um, together as a couple because, um, when you get a diagnosis like this and the next person out is the one that suffers almost as much as you do. Brett and my children, Brett, Max, and Luke are probably the ones that suffered the most with this. But, but Brett's a rock. He's pretty stoic in a lot of ways, which is good because I can emote for the two of us. But Brett's a guy who just gets in there and gets the stuff done, and he sometimes doesn't use the. Sometimes he uses like 587 words to say, "Hey, how's it going?" And then other times he says nothing, and the wheels are really, really
Too
turning. So
many words. Too many words.
I used to say, "Too many words, Brett. Too many words." So that's where Brett was at with that. He's actually handled it quite well. It's been hard because he's had his moments of thinking, you know, that he's going to outlive me, and that may or may not be true. We don't know that. Nobody knows.
Mom Chris says that he would love if you got into the other calming exercises at a later date.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I have a lot. Um, Back in the early 2000s, and Luke is also my witness to this. I went through a period of about 2 years, but when I had really difficult, deep, debilitating uh, anxiety and panic attacks. Started out as anxiety attacks and it went straight into panic, which is almost uncontrollable. And it was a really, really rough period of time for me. And so, but because of that, I learned some calming techniques and some soothing techniques and ways to calm my whole nervous system down and regulate better so that at the first sign of anxiety, I didn't pop right off into panic. So I would be absolutely happy to share that in another episode. That's a really good one. I've got my list right beside me here. I'm going to write that down. Anything else, Luke?
That looks like about all for now.
Okay. Well, I want to keep an eye on the time here, but oh, this is perfect timing. So I really want to thank you guys for joining. These are really important. Sometimes they're hard conversations to have, but they're always really, really important conversations when you're going through something rough in your life, like a really hard diagnosis. It doesn't have to just be like that. You could be going through a divorce. You could be going through, getting laid off at work or not knowing what your purpose in life is. There's lots of different things that can cause these types of feelings to bubble up to the surface. And I love this video format so I can talk with you guys and have this give and take and exchange so we can create this space to talk about what it means to integrate those traumas so that we can continue to live full and meaningful lives and have some happiness and have some joy because nobody wants to live a grim life, filled with no hope and no joy and no meaning or purpose. So I really do appreciate you guys coming and listening, and then, but most importantly, joining a conversation after I speak. That's really what I look forward to the most. So thank you so much for joining, and we will see you again next Wednesday at 6:30 Central Time. See you guys. Thank you.